Welcome to LexTalks Legal Topics Simplified, where we like to break down those tough legal concepts for all you aspiring legal eagles out there.
That's right.
So today, we're diving deep into genocide.
Yeah.
We're going to try to figure out, what it means, how it's defined under international law, and we'll even explore some real-world cases.
We'll look at how understanding the nuances of genocide can be the difference between prosecuting individuals
Right.
versus holding entire nations accountable.
Okay, so before we get into the legal stuff, I was doing a little reading, and I found it kind of interesting that the word genocide, it's a pretty new word. It didn't even exist until the 1940s.
It's true. A Polish lawyer named Raphael Lemkin, he actually coined the term in 1944.
Wow.
He combined Greek and Latin roots to create a word that literally means the destruction of a people.
It's powerful and also kind of disturbing that such a word was even needed at all.
Yeah.
So what pushed him to create it?
Well, Lemkin was deeply affected by witnessing atrocities like the Armenian genocide. He saw how existing legal frameworks failed to capture the unique horror of trying to wipe out an entire group. He was determined to see genocide recognized as a distinct international crime.
So he created the word, but did that actually lead to any legal changes?
It did. His work ultimately led to the 1948 UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide.
Okay.
It's a landmark agreement that still forms the bedrock of international law on this issue.
Okay, so that's the Genocide Convention.
Yes,
And it lays out the legal definition, right?
it does.
But you said earlier that it's more complex than people realize.
Yeah.
So what makes it so tricky?
It's not simply about mass killing. The key lies in proving intent.
Okay.
The convention focuses on acts committed with the specific intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group.
So even if there's widespread killing, it's not automatically genocide.
Exactly. It has to be proven that the perpetrator had the specific intent to destroy the targeted group.
Yeah.
And that intent has to be directed at a substantial part of that group, not just a few individuals.
I see. I'm starting to see why this is so complex.
Yeah.
So what kind of actions are we talking about? What constitutes genocide under the convention?
Well, the convention outlines 5 specific acts. First, of course, is killing members of the group.
That one seems pretty straightforward.
It might seem that way, but proving intent even with killing can be tricky. For example, what about actions that indirectly lead to death, like deliberately creating unbearable living conditions?
Oh, right.
Creating those conditions might be part of a calculated plan to destroy the group, but proving that in court is another matter.
So you have to connect the dots between the action and the ultimate goal of destroying the group.
Yes.
What are the other acts?
The second act is causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. And this can be even harder to define and prove than killing.
Right.
We've seen in recent cases how sexual violence is used as a tool of genocide, inflicting deep psychological trauma on top of physical harm.
That's horrifying. It's hard to imagine the lasting impact that would have on individuals and entire communities.
Absolutely. And the third act focuses on deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction.
So not killing directly, but creating conditions that make survival impossible.
Exactly. Think about things like starvation disease or exposure to the elements, all deliberately orchestrated to wipe out the group. It gets to the heart of destroying a group without necessarily engaging in mass killings directly.
That's chilling. It seems like there are so many ways this can play out. What are the last 2 acts?
The fourth act involves imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group.
Okay.
This could be forced sterilization, separating families to prevent procreation, anything designed to cut off a group's future.
So it's not just about wiping out the existing population, but preventing the group from continuing to exist at all.
Precisely. And lastly, we have the act of forcibly transferring children of the group to another group.
This one is especially heartbreaking. It's not about immediate death, but about cultural annihilation.
Yeah.
Erasing a group's identity by removing its children and forcing them to assimilate into another culture.
You've hit on a crucial point. It's a slower, more insidious form of destruction, but no less devastating in the long run.
So we've got these 5 acts, and proving any of them requires showing that specific intent to destroy the targeted group. It's a really high bar for prosecution.
It is, but that's what makes genocide such a grave and distinct crime. It's about targeting the very essence of a group seeking to erase its existence. Now, to really grasp how this works in practice, let's move on to some real-world cases where these definitions have been put to the test.
Yes, let's see how this framework plays out in the real world.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people would point to the Rwandan genocide as a clear example.
It's certainly one of the most well-known and horrific cases. In 1994, the world watched in horror as Hutus slaughtered Tutsis with the death toll reaching hundreds of thousands in a matter of months.
The scale of the violence was just unimaginable. But even with something so horrific, proven intent to destroy the entire Tutsi group was still crucial for convictions in international courts, right?
Absolutely. The Rwandan genocide trials were groundbreaking in many ways, and they set a precedent for how we understand and prosecute genocide today. The sheer scale and systematic nature of the killings were key pieces of evidence used to establish intent.
So the brutality was undeniable, but the legal focus remained on proving that it was specifically intended to wipe out the Tutsis as a group.
Exactly. And those legal precedents are still being applied today. Think about the ongoing Rohingya crisis with the mass exodus of this Muslim minority from Myanmar.
Yes, that's a situation that's been in the headlines for years. There's been so much debate about whether what's happening to the Rohingya constitutes genocide.
And that's because determining intent in ongoing situations like this, where evidence is still emerging and the political dynamics are incredibly complex, is incredibly difficult.
It's a reminder that these legal definitions aren't just abstract concepts. They're applied to real-world situations with very real consequences.
Precisely. And there's another case that's currently unfolding that highlights this complexity: South Africa v. Israel at the International Court of Justice. This case accuses Israel of violating the Genocide Convention during the Israel-Hamas war.
Wow, that's a high-stakes case.
Yeah.
It really shows how accusations of genocide can arise even in complex, protracted conflicts where there are arguments about the motivations and actions of all parties involved.
It's a case that's sure to be closely scrutinized by legal scholars and human rights advocates alike. It underscores how the legacy of the Genocide Convention continues to shape how we respond to mass violence and hold perpetrators accountable even decades after it was created.
This is all so fascinating but really heavy stuff. We've covered a lot of ground, but I'm wondering, where do we even go from here?
I think it's important to remember that genocide is more than just a legal definition.
Okay.
It's crucial for future legal professionals like yourselves to understand the nuances of this crime.
Right.
But we also need to think about the wider impact of genocide. It's not just about legal battles, it's about the human cost of these atrocities.
Right. We've talked about the legal definitions and some high-profile cases, but what about the individual experiences of those who have lived through genocide?
That's something we need to address. The trauma experienced by survivors is immense, and the scars left on societies can last for decades, even centuries. Reconciliation and rebuilding are long and arduous processes.
It's a sobering reminder of why understanding and preventing genocide is so vital. But before we dive into those aspects, I think it's worth unpacking some of the debates surrounding the definition itself. Because it's not without its critics, right?
Absolutely. There are some real points of contention. For instance, the exclusion of political groups has sparked a lot of discussion and calls for revision.
Yes, we touched on that earlier. That seems like a pretty big loophole, potentially allowing for politically motivated mass killings to go unpunished under the banner of genocide.
That's the argument many people make. They say that political persecution can be just as brutal and systematic as any other form of group-targeted violence.
I can see that, but I'm guessing there's another side to this debate.
There is some argue that including political groups could politicize the definition of genocide, making it easier for states to misuse the term for their own political gain.
Right. It's like anything can be twisted and manipulated. It's about finding that balance between having a definition that's comprehensive and one that can't be abused.
Exactly. And this debate highlights a fundamental tension at the heart of international law: the need to uphold state sovereignty while also protecting individuals from horrific crimes.
So it's a balancing act. Where do things stand now? Is there any movement towards revising the Genocide Convention to include political groups?
There have been calls for revision, but amending a treaty as significant as the Genocide Convention is a monumental task. It requires consensus among a vast number of states, which is often difficult to achieve, especially on such a sensitive issue.
So for now, it seems like the exclusion of political groups remains a point of contention and a source of ongoing debate in the field of international law.
That's right. And it's a debate that you, as future lawyers, will likely grapple with in your careers. The definition of genocide is not static. It's a constantly evolving concept shaped by legal interpretation, historical events, and changing societal values.
It reminds us that law is not just about memorizing definitions. It's about engaging in ongoing critical analysis and understanding the context in which those definitions operate. Speaking of context, I think it's time we delved into some of the historical events that have shaped our understanding of genocide.
Absolutely. The Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, the Rwandan genocide, these are all horrific events that have forced the world to confront the reality of this crime.
Let's start with the Holocaust, arguably the most well-known and studied case of genocide in history. What makes it so crucial to understand this event in the context of our discussion?
Well, the Holocaust is often seen as the archetypal case of genocide. It was the event that really brought the horrors of this crime into sharp focus for the international community. The systematic, industrialized nature of the Nazi genocide against Jews, as well as other targeted groups, shook the world and served as a catalyst for the creation of the Genocide Convention itself.
It's a tragic irony this horrific event ultimately led to the creation of a legal framework designed to prevent such atrocities from happening again. What are some of the key takeaways we can learn from studying the Holocaust?
One of the most important takeaways is the importance of recognizing and challenging the early warning signs of genocide. The Holocaust didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process of escalating persecution, fueled by hateful ideology, and enabled by widespread indifference and complicity.
It's a chilling reminder that genocide doesn't just happen spontaneously. It's a process that can potentially be stopped if we're vigilant and willing to act.
Precisely. Another key takeaway from the Holocaust is the importance of individual responsibility. While it's tempting to focus solely on the actions of leaders and perpetrators, it's crucial to remember that ordinary people can play a role in either enabling or resisting genocide.
Those are powerful lessons, and ones that we can apply not only to understanding past atrocities, but also to our efforts to prevent future ones.
Absolutely. The Holocaust, though unique in its horrific details, provides a framework for understanding the patterns of genocide that we see repeated throughout history. It teaches us about the dangers of unchecked hatred, the fragility of human rights, and the importance of collective action to prevent such atrocities from happening again.
And on that note, let's turn our attention to another horrific chapter in history, the Armenian Genocide. This event, which occurred during World War I, is often overshadowed by the Holocaust, but it's no less significant in terms of its impact and the lessons it holds.
You're right. The Armenian genocide perpetrated by the Ottoman Empire against its Armenian population is a stark reminder that genocide can occur in any historical context. It also shows how political upheaval can create fertile ground for such atrocities.
It's also a reminder of the power of denial. For decades, the Turkish government has refused to acknowledge the Armenian genocide as such, which has been a source of ongoing pain and tension for the Armenian community.
That's a really important point. Denial is often a tool used by perpetrators to evade responsibility and silence the voices of victims. It's a form of historical revisionism that can have devastating consequences, as it allows the wounds of the past to fester and prevents genuine reconciliation.
It seems like acknowledging and confronting the past is an essential part of healing and preventing future atrocities.
It is. Truth and reconciliation are essential components of any meaningful effort to address the legacy of genocide. Acknowledging the truth of past atrocities, holding perpetrators accountable, and providing support for survivors are all crucial steps towards rebuilding trust and fostering a more just and peaceful world.
Well said. And with that, let's move on to the next part of our deep dive. We'll continue to explore the complexities of genocide, focusing on more recent cases that have shaped international law and challenged our understanding of this complex crime.
Yeah, it's striking how often genocide occurs during times of war or political instability.
Yeah, it's almost like chaos creates an opening for these horrific acts to occur.
Right.
Or at least it makes it easier to rationalize them.
That's a good observation. The fog of war can obscure accountability, and pre-existing tensions can be exploited to incite violence against certain groups.
We saw that play out in Rwanda, where decades of ethnic tensions between Hutus and Tutsis exploded into genocide.
Yeah, the Rwandan genocide is a tragic example of how quickly mass violence can spiral out of control, especially when fueled by propaganda and fear-mongering.
It's a sobering reminder of how fragile peace can be and how quickly societies can descend into violence.
It also highlights the crucial role that international law plays in holding perpetrators accountable and deterring future atrocities.
Speaking of international law, what about the International Criminal Court, or the ICC?
Yeah.
I know is established to prosecute individuals for genocide crimes against humanity and war crimes.
Right, the ICC is a powerful tool for justice, but it's not without its limitations. It relies on cooperation from states, which can be politically charged, and it has faced criticism for focusing primarily on African countries.
So it's a step in the right direction, but there's still work to be done in terms of ensuring that international justice is truly impartial and effective.
Absolutely. The pursuit of justice for genocide is a long and complex process, often fraught with legal and political obstacles.
But it's a pursuit that we as a global community cannot afford to abandon. The memory of past atrocities demands that we strive for accountability and work towards a future where such horrors are never repeated.
Well said. And that brings us to a crucial question. What can be done to prevent genocide? Is it even possible to stop such deeply rooted hatred and violence?
It's a daunting question, but I believe prevention is possible even if it's a long and challenging process.
I agree. And it starts with education, teaching future generations about the horrors of genocide, the dangers of intolerance and discrimination, and the importance of human rights is essential.
Education is key, but it can't be the only answer. We also need to address the root causes of genocide, such as poverty, inequality, and political instability.
You're right, those are all contributing factors. We need to create societies that are more just equitable and inclusive, where people feel valued and respected regardless of their ethnic, religious, or cultural background.
Creating a more just world feels like a huge undertaking, but I do believe it's achievable.
I agree with you. It requires a collective effort from governments, civil society organizations, and individuals around the world.
It also requires a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about our own societies and to challenge the systems and structures that perpetuate inequality and discrimination.
You've hit on a fundamental point. Preventing genocide is not just a legal or political issue, it's a moral imperative. It's about recognizing the inherent dignity and worth of every human being and acting to protect those who are most vulnerable.
And it's about remembering the victims of past genocides, honoring their memory by working to prevent such atrocities from happening again.
Their stories serve as a powerful reminder of the human cost of genocide and the urgent need for action.
It's a responsibility that falls on all of us. But as future lawyers, you have a particularly important role to play.
How so?
Well, you'll be the ones upholding the law, advocating for justice, and shaping the policies that can help prevent genocide.
That's a lot of responsibility.
It is, but it's also an incredible opportunity to make a real difference in the world, to use your legal skills, to fight for human rights, to hold perpetrators accountable, and to create a more just and peaceful society.
You're making me feel inspired.
Good, that's the point. Genocide is a heavy topic, but it's one that we need to talk about, to learn from, and to act upon. We can't afford to be complacent or indifferent.
Absolutely. The stakes are too high. The lives of millions of people depend on our willingness to understand, to remember, and to act.
Now let's delve into another important aspect of genocide, the psychological impact on survivors and the challenges of rebuilding societies after such horrific events. Trauma is an invisible wound that can linger for generations.
It certainly does. Survivors of genocide often experience profound psychological trauma, including post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and survivor's guilt.
And those psychological scars can have a ripple effect impacting families, communities, and entire societies.
You're right. The trauma of genocide can be passed down through generations, leading to intergenerational conflict, distrust, and a sense of collective pain.
So how do societies even begin to heal and rebuild after experiencing such profound violence and loss?
It's a long and difficult process, one that requires a multifaceted approach. First and foremost, survivors need access to mental health services and support to help them cope with the trauma they've endured.
That's essential. But what about the broader societal healing?
That involves addressing the root causes of the conflict that led to the genocide. It means promoting justice and accountability, fostering reconciliation between different groups, and creating a culture of respect for human rights.
It sounds like a monumental task.
It is. But there are examples of countries that have made significant progress in rebuilding after genocide. Rwanda, for instance, has made remarkable strides in promoting reconciliation and economic development.
That's encouraging to hear. It shows that even in the face of unimaginable horror, hope and healing are possible.
Absolutely. The human spirit is incredibly resilient. And with the right support and resources, societies can rebuild, learn from their past, and create a better future.
That's a powerful message, one that we should all carry with us as we continue our exploration of this complex and challenging topic.
Indeed, genocide is a crime that leaves an indelible mark on humanity. But it's also a call to action, a call to remember to learn and to work tirelessly to prevent such atrocities from happening again.
And that's a call that we must answer. Now let's shift our focus to another chilling aspect of genocide, the use of propaganda and hate speech to incite violence and dehumanize targeted groups.
Propaganda plays a pivotal role in most, if not all, cases of genocide. It's a tool used by perpetrators to spread fear, hatred, and misinformation, creating a climate of intolerance that makes genocide possible.
It's about manipulating public opinion, turning neighbors against each other, and justifying the unthinkable.
Precisely, propaganda often portrays the targeted group as a threat, as subhuman or as deserving of punishment. This dehumanization makes it easier for ordinary people to participate in or condone violence against them.
We see this pattern repeated throughout history, from the Nazi propaganda that demonized Jews to the Rwandan radio broadcasts that incited Hutus to kill Tutsis.
And in the age of social media, the spread of propaganda and hate speech has become even more rapid and pervasive.
That's a frightening thought. So what can be done to counter the influence of propaganda?
It requires a multi-pronged approach. We need to educate people about how to recognize and critically evaluate propaganda. We need to promote media literacy and critical thinking skills.
And we need to hold those who spread hate speech and incite violence accountable for their words.
Absolutely. Freedom of speech is a fundamental right, but it's not absolute. There are limits, and inciting genocide is one of them.
It's a delicate balance, but one that we must strive to maintain. We can't allow hate speech to flourish unchecked. It's a poison that can destroy societies from within.
Well said. And on that note, let's take a closer look at some of the legal and ethical challenges involved in prosecuting genocide.
Prosecuting genocide is a complex and often lengthy process requiring meticulous evidence, gathering legal expertise, and international cooperation.
It's also fraught with ethical dilemmas. For example, how do you balance the pursuit of justice with the need to protect witnesses and survivors from further trauma?
That's a tough question. And how do you ensure that trials are fair and impartial, especially in countries where the justice system may be weak or compromised?
Those are just some of the challenges that prosecutors and judges face when dealing with genocide cases.
It's a reminder that justice is not always easy or straightforward,
Yeah,
but it's a pursuit that we must never give up on.
agreed. The fight against genocide is a long and arduous one, but it's a fight worth fighting because it's a fight for the very soul of humanity.
Powerful words. And with that, let's shift gears and delve deeper into the specific legal elements of genocide, exploring the intricacies of proving intent, defining protected groups, and understanding the different acts that constitute this horrific crime. We've talked about the horrors of genocide and the challenges of preventing it, but now I think it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of the law itself.
Okay.
What are the specific legal elements that need to be proven to actually secure a genocide conviction?
You're right. Understanding those elements is key, especially for future lawyers like yourselves. It all comes down to proving intent, identifying the protected group, and demonstrating that one or more of those 5 acts we discussed were committed against that group.
So let's start with intent. We've touched on it throughout this deep dive, but it seems like it's the most crucial element.
It is. Remember, the Genocide Convention defines genocide as acts committed with the specific intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. It's not enough to show that a large number of people were killed. You have to prove that those killings were part of a deliberate plan to eliminate the group itself.
So how do prosecutors actually go about proving intent? It's not like they could read the perpetrator's mind.
Exactly. Direct evidence of intent, like a written order to exterminate a group, is incredibly rare. More often, it's a matter of piecing together circumstantial evidence.
It's like a legal jigsaw puzzle.
Right.
What kind of pieces are we talking about?
Think about the scale and nature of the atrocities. Were they widespread and systematic? Were specific groups singled out for persecution? Were there patterns of violence that suggest a deliberate attempt to destroy the group rather than just control or punish them?
So it's about looking at the bigger picture, connecting the dots between the actions and the ultimate goal of wiping out the group.
Precisely. And there are other pieces of the puzzle statements made by perpetrators' propaganda that dehumanizes the targeted group evidence of planning and coordination. All of these can help establish intent.
It sounds incredibly challenging.
It is. Proving intent in genocide cases is one of the most difficult aspects of these prosecutions.
Okay, so let's say the prosecution can prove intent. What about the groups that are protected under the Genocide Convention? How are those categories defined?
That's where things get even trickier. The convention itself doesn't provide detailed definitions for national, ethnical, racial, or religious groups. It's left open to interpretation.
So it comes down to a case-by-case basis.
In a way, yes. Generally, it comes down to shared characteristics.
Yeah.
Does the group have a common language, culture, history, or religious belief? It's about a sense of collective identity.
But what about cases where those identities are fluid or contested, like mixed ethnicities or people who don't neatly fit into one religious category?
Those are valid questions. And they highlight just how complex these cases can be. Defining a protected group is often a matter of intense legal debate, and it requires a careful, nuanced analysis of the specific context.
So we've got intent and the protected group. Let's move on to those 5 acts that constitute genocide. You mentioned earlier that even the seemingly straightforward act of killing members of the group is more complicated than it appears.
That's right. In the context of genocide, it's not simply about individual acts of violence. Proving this act requires showing that the killings were part of a systematic, deliberate targeting of the group for extermination.
So random acts of violence wouldn't qualify.
Not unless they could be linked to a broader pattern of persecution aimed at destroying the group.
What about the second act causing serious bodily or mental harm? That seems like a broader category.
It is. It encompasses a wide range of actions, from torture and rape to forced displacement and the deliberate creation of inhumane living conditions. The key, again, is proving that these acts were carried out with the specific intent to destroy the group.
The third act focuses on deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction. We talked earlier about how this can be a slower, more insidious form of genocide.
Yes, it's about creating an environment where survival is impossible, leading to the group's gradual extinction. Imagine cutting off access to food, water, or medical care. These actions might not involve direct killing, but they can be just as effective in wiping out a population.
The fourth act is about preventing births within the group. I remember you mentioned forced sterilization as a prime example.
That's right. And it also includes things like the forcible separation of families to prevent procreation. This act is about attacking the group's future, preventing them from replenishing their numbers and continuing their existence.
And finally, there's the act of forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. This one always seems especially cruel because it's about erasing the group's culture and identity.
Exactly. Taking children from their families and forcing them to assimilate into another culture is a devastating attack on the group's sense of belonging and continuity. It's a way of severing the ties that bind a people together and ensuring that their cultural heritage is lost.
Wow. These 5 acts taken together really paint a chilling picture of the many ways genocide can manifest. It's not just about mass killings, it's about a multi-pronged assault on a group's very existence.
And that's why understanding these nuances is so crucial for future lawyers like yourselves. You will be the ones upholding the law, advocating for justice, and protecting vulnerable groups. The fight against genocide requires a deep understanding of the legal complexities involved.
Well said. This deep dive has been incredibly insightful, but also very sobering. What's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
Genocide is not just a historical event. It's an ongoing threat that requires our constant vigilance and unwavering commitment to prevention and accountability.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you for listening to LexTalks, Legal Topics Simplified. We hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of genocide and its implications for the legal world. Stay tuned for more deep dives into the fascinating world of law.